Running backs are finally starting to separate from the pack, and some backfields are becoming crystal clear, and others are a total mess. Between injuries, bye weeks, and shifting workloads, this is where depth matters the most. So let's break down the top 30 running backs that you can actually count on heading into Week 8. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings between Jake and Kyle. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted on the channel this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, make sure to join the Fantasy Headliners community by tapping that join button below, and that's going to get you access to extra rankings like our flex, kicker, defense, and an exclusive spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we move into the rankings for Week 8, we've got a few hits and misses from Week 7. Our first hit is Quinshon Judkins, and between the weather and the Miami matchup, we put Judkins all the way up in Tier 1, and he had his best game of the year, and he finished RB3. Our next hit was Cam Skattebo, and tough Denver matchup, and no worries for Scat. Dude is almost locked into the top 12 weekly. We ranked him at RB12, and he finished at RB9. And our next hit was Kamani Vidal, and after a big Week 6, a lot of people put a ton of faith in him. We didn't buy the hype, though. We ranked him at RB26, and he finished at RB30. Okay, so there's our hits, but we've got to cop to our misses, and what about Jaylen Warren? We got to love that they committed volume to him, but I wish that we could trust that weekly, because Pittsburgh decided to abandon Gainwell and Johnson. We saw Jaylen Warren eat, and we had him way too low. Next up is Ramondre Stevenson, and there are just so many weapons that can have good games in New England. It's always hard to rely on the run game, and Ramondre finished at RB11, but we barely had him inside of the top 25. Next up is Kyren Williams, and guys, everything lined up perfectly for a huge Kyren game. The Rams got a lead. They had multiple goal line opportunities. Instead of a big Kyren game, we saw Adams with 3 one-yard touchdowns. All right, so there's your hits and misses. Now let's turn the page to Week 8. We've got Tier 1, starting with Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, and Devon Achane. At number 1, top of the list, no surprise, Jonathan Taylor, the RB1 overall, who's now had over 28 fantasy points in 4 games this year. And he gets the Titans, who allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs on the season. Plus, when they played back in Week 3, JT had 118 total yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. At number 2, we've got Bijan Robinson, and he's the RB3 overall in the season, and he gets a matchup against Miami, who's allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs at over 25 fantasy points per game. I mean, Miami just got blown out by Cleveland of all people, and Judkins had 3 touchdowns against them. At 3, we've got Christian McCaffrey going into Houston, and 20 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he's already had 185 touches in just 7 weeks. Yes, you heard me right there. And now Houston, it's not the easiest defense to run on, but with CMC racking up targets and receptions every week, he will be able to find space again. At number 4, we've got Josh Jacobs, and 8 touchdowns through 6 weeks, and he's had 40 plus receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games. Now, the passing game isn't consistent, but the run game sure has been. And this Pittsburgh defense has allowed over 18 fantasy points per game as well, so Jacobs has a chance at another good week. At number 5, we've got Devon Achane, and he's the only Miami weapon that's startable weekly. He's had 10 plus fantasy points in every game this season, and he's had at least 90 total yards or a touchdown in every game this season. It is easier to run on Atlanta than it is to throw on them, which we like Devon Achane in the top 5. All right, so that's it for Tier 1. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. You already know that we are crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app and create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit, come join a contest, and if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's Headliners, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers offers weekly. And check this out. When you play your first $5, they're going to give you a $100 Benjamin in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget that Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. So links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, baby, let's get into tier 2. We've got Quinshon Judkins, James Cook, Javonte Williams, Cam Scatterboo, Derrick Henry, J.K. Dobbins, and Saquon Barkley. At number 6, Quinshon Judkins, and he's the best offensive option that Cleveland has every week. 24 plus touches in 3 of his last 4. He's had 529 yards and 5 touchdowns in 6 games. It's not like he's had a ton of easy matchups either. He's already faced 2 of the top 5 run defenses in the NFL, and that's why he's locked in to number 6. At number 7, we've got James Cook, and he's coming off the bye week, and he's had back-to-back games under 10 fantasy points. Both games were Buffalo losses and against solid defenses in Atlanta and New England, and Carolina's defense is no pushover either. And so this game is not going to be as easy as it seems. At number 8, we've got Javonte Williams, and we have a Javonte Williams revenge game coming into Denver. The return of CeeDee Lamb only hopes, and so much attention going to the passing game is only going to open up lanes weekly for Javonte. Now, Denver's not going to be the easiest matchup, but they do allow over 18 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 9, we've got Cam Scatterboo going into Philadelphia, and the scat onslaught continues. Tough matchups, easy matchups. It doesn't seem to matter. He's going to be getting around 20 touches, and he's going to fight for every yard. We saw him against Philly a couple weeks ago, and he had 3 touchdowns. At number 10, we've got Derrick Henry, and can the Ravens get back on track? At the time of this recording, Lamar Jackson and multiple starters on the defense, they're still questionable. Chicago allows the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs, but we need Baltimore to keep the game close. At number 11, we have J.K. Dobbins, and even in a game in which they fell behind by 30 points, he still racked up 80 total yards and averaged almost 6 yards per carry. Now he gets Dallas, who allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs and have allowed over 130 rush yards in 4 straight games. At number 12, we have Saquon Barkley, and he still continues to disappoint. There's not a soul out there that expected Saquon to go 7 straight games with less than 100 total yards in any of them. He just faced this Giants defense a couple weeks ago, and he was held to 7 fantasy points. All right, so that's it for tier 2. Let's look at tier 3. We have Rachaad White, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, Breece Hall, Rico Dowdle, Alvin Kamara, and Jordan Mason. At number 13, we have Rachaad White, and the question is, when does Bucky Irving return? We have to think that with the loss of Evans, they don't rush Bucky back and risk further injury, which means we get another week of Rachaad White, now against New Orleans, who is a much easier matchup than Detroit was last week. At number 14, we have DeAndre Swift, and 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns in just his last 2 games. TDs in 4 of his last 5, and the Chicago offense and all of its pass-catching weapons are opening up run lanes for Swift. And it'll be interesting to see how many injured defenders that Baltimore has coming off of the bye. At number 15, we have Jalen Warren, and it's simple. Give him over 13 touches, and he's going to get you around 10 fantasy points. It's not rocket science. It's basic math. It's common sense. And with Rodgers in a Green Bay revenge game, he's going to want his top playmakers involved. At number 16, we have Chase Brown, and Flacco has injected life into this Cincy offense. Brown just had his best game of the year, and with Flacco finding success down the field, it's a huge help to Chase. Browning couldn't do that, and the boxes were stacked. At 17, we have Breece Hall, and the change to Tyrod can't hurt at this point. If anything, maybe it results in a couple more touches weekly and maybe a touchdown chance at some point. It's a great chance for it this week against Cincinnati, who allows the most fantasy points per game to running backs in the NFL. At number 18, we have Rico Dowdle, and Hubbard returned, and Uncle Rico still had 18 touches and 96 total yards. And that's a great sign that his volume could be here to stay, especially in a matchup against Buffalo, who is way easier to run on than they are to throw on. At number 19, we've got Alvin Kamara, and Miller is out for the season, and Devin Neal is going to get a chance, but it may also result in a little more work for Kamara on the ground as well. The problem is he hasn't been great on the ground, but we like this matchup against Tampa heading into week 8. And rounding out tier 3 at number 20, we have Jordan Mason, and Aaron Jones has been designated to return, but Jordan Mason will play this week. He'll start against LA LA, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to running backs. The bigger issue is the fact that Mason is averaging less than 3 yards per touch for 3 straight games. All right, that's it for tier 3. Let's look at tier 4. We've got Ramondre Stevenson, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Kamani Vidal, Tony Pollard, Chuba Hubbard, Brashard Smith, Woody Marks, Isaiah Pacheco, Kyle Monangai, and Tajay Spears. At number 21, we've got Ramondre Stevenson, and he isn't going anywhere. He just had his first 20-touch game of the season, and the Pats have no interest in including Henderson anymore. This is Stevenson's backfield, but this matchup isn't great. Cleveland allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 22, we've got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and back-to-back chances to take this job and solidify it. And what did he do? Absolutely nothing. In 2 easy matchups against Dallas and Chicago, 32 combined touches for just 100 total yards. That's not going to cut it. And now he gets Kansas City, who is one of the best run defenses in the NFL. At number 23, we've got Kamani Vidal, and Week 7 was a great reminder of how important matchups are. It's why you're watching this channel. Yeah, he looked great against Miami, and he had a whole 35 yards against Indianapolis, and we saw all of you in the comments last week, and here we are. We got it right. Now he gets the Vikings, who allow the 11th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs, so we'll see if you listen this week. At number 24, we have Tony Pollard going into Indianapolis, and we wonder how much Pollard wishes that he would have signed somewhere. This Titan offense, not very good. Sucks. Yeah. And they're always losing. And even though he's playing well, he can't get enough volume, and the Colts allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 25, we've got Chuba Hubbard, and it sure seems like Hubbard and Rico are both going to split huge volume. He had 16 touches, but he just didn't perform as well as Rico. We have to hope that both of them are going to be used against Buffalo this week as well. At number 26, we have Brashard Smith, and did he benefit from Kansas City blowing out Vegas? Yes, absolutely. Is he also the best option in the Kansas City backfield? 100%. He will be involved in the pass game, and with all the injuries in Washington, we could be looking at another big KC lead in Week 8. At number 27, we've got Big Woody Marks, and we may be about that Chubb life, but Woody Marks just looks better with his touches. Much more explosive, and with Nico in concussion protocol, they are going to need the playmaking ability against a 49ers defense that actually looks pretty good right now. At number 28, we've got Isaiah Pacheco, and we know that he'll start off with a bulk of the touches on the ground, and the Washington defense hasn't been able to stop much lately, so we have him here at number 28. At number 29, we have Kyle Monangai, and if you don't have fun saying that, you're not saying it right, Monangai. And so tons of volume in Week 7, but with the weather and the matchup against New Orleans, all Chicago had to do was pound the rock. And so a lot of the success this week is going to depend on the overall health to the defense in Baltimore. And then rounding out the top 30, we've got Tajay Spears, and you have to think that Indy gets an early lead in this game, and the Titans will be throwing all game long to try and catch up. With all the buys and injuries, we're just hoping for a big play here. All right, so there's your top 30 in tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we've got a couple of guys on the outside looking in, and Tyler Algier, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Gainwell, RJ Harvey, Kareem Hunt, and Travion Henderson. And that's how the running back board shakes out for Week 8. Which backs are you going to be riding with this week, and who's sitting on your bench? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed for weekly rankings across every position. Headliner Nation, we'll see you in the next one.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.